So, Halloween is about a week away right now. So I thought, okay, I've got the hair for it. Let me try to be Disney's Pocahontas. So I decided, let me clean up my studio, let me dig through my stash, and see what I can whip up real quick. And I'm not going with anything too crazy. I'm not like redesigning or anything. I'm just straight up going with Disney's version of Pocahontas. But I guess we're just gonna go with it and hope for the best. I started out by marking the neckline of my dress with tape, and then I slapped some fabric on top, but then I realized that cutting it would be a bad idea because I didn't have any backup fabric in case I had made any mistakes. There's something in my head that will just not let me cut into fabric like that. So here's just a plain knit bodice that I'm going to convert to have the appropriate style lines and neckline, just because I just can't. I need to make sure that it fits before I cut it out of the fabric. It's just like some mental thing. So I just used my plain slopers that I have, and we're just going to adjust it. Here I am marking my style lines on the mock-up that I made and pinning out some darts, carrying that all the way into the back, and I'm actually drawing the bottom of my facing piece too. Here I'm trying it on just because I already know from experience the darts always need to be deeper than you think they will. And I also like to cover those armpits and raise that neckline because this dress is for me, so I wanted to make it how I would be comfortable wearing it. And I think we're ready. And I'm actually pretty glad that I'm doing this because this is going to be a nice strapless pattern I can just kind of keep in my library, in my stash, for something that fits me. Because I have all these patterns that fit my clients, but nothing that's like perfectly fitted to me. So yay, success. I thought this would be pretty fun to show you because I just got this vintage Singer sewing machine and I wanted to play with it and see how far I could get on the dress just using a treadle machine. As you can see, I am still figuring it out, but I managed to sew the entire skirt using the treadle. Here's the bodice that I'm going to be making adjustments to, laying flat on the table. So all that I've done is I've just marked some style lines and I've pinned out a dart on each side. All of this is going to be gone. We're going to make a strap across the shoulder, and that's pretty much that. For the back, very simple. We just have one shoulder and then 1/2 inch seam allowance at the center back, and it goes into the front here, strapless. So the back is relatively straightforward. We're just going to cut away the top pieces. Looking back at it, I probably should have made my style lines a little bit more clean, but here we are. So I will just mark my darts in a different color so I can see that better when I take out my pins. When I put the outside dart leg in line with the opposite side, right here you see my blue marks, I can tell that this dart is so much deeper than that one. My blue line is right here. So, which makes sense because the side that's strapless always needs a little bit more adjusting. To speed this up, I've already traced my one side of my back, my front, and my other back piece. And now for the most exciting part, let's pin all of this in place. To pin the mock-up down onto the paper, I'm just making sure that all the seams match up, and I'm just patting down the fabric because it's stretched out a little bit when I tried it on. Because I have pinned the bottom here, I can't really get the shoulder and this part that I need, so I'm just making another connection over here with my pins so I can remove this. I know that it walks, so I can use this in order to move that part. And now for the most fun part of transferring the pattern, using the tracing wheel with the long prongs to mark all of your style lines and all of your darts. Sometimes I will make a straight line across the apex of my dart just to identify where that is, in addition to marking the 2 dart legs. So here are where my apexes are, and you can see just how crooked that is. Even my center front is off. So what I'm going to do is I'm just going to make sure that the apex is symmetrical, the center front is symmetrical, so I have an even pattern piece here. And this pattern is just for me. It is not for any industry or anything. So I'm just going to mark it how my brain thinks, and hopefully it helps you. I'm seeing that one of my apexes is here, one of my apexes is here. So I'm choosing the midpoint, which is right here, and I'm just drawing a straight line because, of course, away from the center front, I am not sure yet how far out they're going to be. So when you're looking at the distance over here and the distance over here, that is relatively same. Of course, I round up or down to the 16th of an inch. Let's not get too crazy over here. I'm putting my ruler perpendicular to my center front line and just transferring that center front neckline. From the side seam, I could see here that this one is about an inch away, and this one is about 2 inches away, a little bit less than 2 inches. So let's choose a midpoint and let's make it about 1.5 inches away from the armhole for that dart on both sides. And of course you should be using a tape measure, but I'm not, because I'm just trying to make this speedy. This is a Halloween costume after all, we don't have all day. We are not going to make these exactly the same, we're just going to make them the same distance from the armpit, because like I mentioned, the strapless side is going to need a little bit more contouring so the neckline isn't gaping or isn't too low or anything like that. So this one we have 1.75 inches, so we're going to transfer to over here, 1.75 right there. And I'm circling all the lines that I like that I'm going to keep. And of course you could be using a French ruler for this, but I'm not today. Here I am measuring out the distance between my dart legs and filling those in on both sides, after which I'm going to fill in the shoulder, the angle of the shoulder, and drawing in a graceful neckline. To determine the dart uptake angle or the seam allowance of your dart, you need to first cut out your piece. You don't need to cut out the seam allowance yet. You will be creasing the bottom dart leg and folding it upwards. Traditionally, the dart uptake is facing down or towards the center. Then you draw in your seam allowance, and don't forget to true your lines and make the curvature of the armhole as nice as you like it, and then cut it out. When it's open, you will have your funky dart shape. Now we transfer the neckline to the other side, folding along the center front line and using the tracing wheel to get our dots on the opposite side. Putting in our seam allowance and cutting all that out. The facing piece will be carried through from the back right side through the front into the left back side. To make this pattern piece, we will begin by drawing a straight line along our grid that will serve as our center back line, and we will place the pattern piece along that line so our center backs are aligned. I am making sure that I make my piece about 2 to 2.5 inches wide, and my paper has a 1 inch grid on it, so that makes it really easy to see. I continue to do this with my front piece. I'm just marking my center front line along the grid, placing my piece down, and I'm able to mark out of the center front line along the neckline up into the inner dart leg. So I'm able to the left side, carry up into that shoulder, and finish off at that inner dart leg. Now I'm going to place my finger on the apex, move my paper up, and close that dart, and draw in the other part of my pattern piece. You can see I'm lifting my weight here so I have access to draw in the opposite side. To draw in the bottom line of your facing piece, first put in a notch at where the seam allowance is at the top and draw in the width of your facing piece. From there, I am just going to draw a graceful line across the front. You can definitely make sure that your facing piece is the same distance from the neckline all across, but in this case, I don't need to be doing all that, so I'm just drawing a nice straight line, which is going to be easier to sew too. Make sure to keep the bottom of your facing piece perpendicular to the side seam. The facing piece for the left back panel is going to be made in a similar way by drawing in our center back and then tracing the top of the piece, making sure that you go low enough that you have the width of your facing intact. Now the angle of the bottom of the piece depends on you. Of course, the more that you curve it, the harder it will be to sew later. Here is the little bodice sewn up with the facing kind of secured in there. A few things that I want to show you. This is the top side, the front. I want to show you how I did the corners. Flipping this up, this has a nice substantial clip in there on the corner, so I was able to turn that really nicely. I also added some seam binding along the neckline because I didn't want that to warp out of place. Another thing is the back neckline has a substantial curve. Since the back neckline has such a substantial curve, typically we are instructed to clip into the seam allowance here so this can lay nice and flat. What I like to do is I like to use my pinking shears for this because honestly whenever I clip into the seams it ends up being that I have really deep clips and now I have stairs in my curve, and I don't like that, and I think that pinking shears do a much better job at making sure that that distribution inside here is even. The belt will be just a couple of rectangles that I've gently contoured to fit my measurements. I will be flatlining these around just to prevent a couple of layers of fabric from shifting. I am using 2 layers of lining for this belt because I already had this fabric and I wanted to make this project without buying anything new. You can see that I'm sewing a straight line along the center of my fisheye dart before I fold it in half and sew the full thing. This is going to prevent the layers from shifting. Onto the boning, since the belt is 3 inches wide, I am cutting 3-inch long boning pieces and I'm pressing them nice and flat. After that, I am just capping these with masking tape because I'm trying to make this really speedy. After I attach them, I'm able to trim off the edges to make them nice and neat. I'll be adding an additional strip of boning here and here, and these two I am not capping because they will be covered by these bonings over here. So first things first, these will be attached over here, and I'm making sure not to exceed my seam allowance at the bottom. And I'm just going to roll in from the top of the piece, reverse, come down, and reverse again. And I'm making sure that my bottom cap of my boning is right there because I know that then it'll be covered when I place my next bone right there. I don't want it to be, for example, too far out because then it will not cover. So it's just a matter of eyeing it. You can also measure it for yourself, draw out the width of this boning, for example, and make sure that you're inside the safe lines. So two things right now. I am making sure that the uptake from my fisheye dart here is not sewn through because I will need this to attach my new bone. Another thing is when I'm placing this boning, since I didn't really draw a good enough line for myself, I am paying close attention to the angle here and making sure that this triangular shape is the same or very similar on this side. And because I have my center line here marked, it's much easier for me to look at these two shapes and say, okay, that looks even, this looks a little bit off. You can see that the angle needs to be pretty similar over here. Now when I cover this area with my center bone, I need to make sure that I center it in such a way where it looks the most even on both sides. I have chosen to face my fisheye dart uptake, or the little seams, towards the center. So I will make sure, and this is a little bit tricky, that I'm able to see the edge of my boning here, or estimate exactly where that is. And by exactly, I mean exactly, because we'll be placing this little stitch line on the boning channel in line with here and sewing it right in that crease, making sure to catch it underneath. If you lift the boning, or whatever trim you're sewing on, if you lift it like this, you'll be able to place it down on your new stitching line. It's so much easier to look underneath and then place it down. Now I'm going to pull my pieces apart as I slide this over and finish everything off. At this point, I realized that I hadn't really thought about how I'm going to put on and take off this belt. So I decided to improvise and make a row of loops on each side of the belt and create a strap to tie the belt together, kind of like a corset. I used some excess selvage that I had from my fabric that I kind of stitched in half and then in quarter to create the loops and to create the ties. I'm putting the boning piece down onto the belt here and stitching it down, and to finish the top and the bottom of the belt, I just used a grosgrain ribbon to match the dress to turn it under and stitch it down. Here is our Disney Pocahontas, complete with the belt and everything, fringe on the bottom of the skirt. Let's see her twirl. And my squeaky dress form, yes. Let me bring her a little bit closer so you can get a better look. Okay, so here's the fringe along the neckline, along the shoulder. I want to show you the dart. I gotta put something on that squeak there. Here's the dart that I made along the bust line into the apex of the bust. The design with the V on the belt. The belt tie with the little tiny loops. And I want to show you the design of the belt carries on into the back where we have that V along the center back. And honestly, I just gave her an invisible zipper. Hopefully that's pretty straightforward. This is what it looks like on the inside. Pretty simple. Luckily this fabric doesn't fray or anything, so it's not that serious. And it's got a little bit of gather over here because I used the wrong pattern. And here are the details of the dress while I'm wearing it, so you can check out the fit. I think it's pretty good. I know that some of the sewing went pretty speedy, so for more detailed tutorials, check out the.sewing.resource.com.